Oh, did I spill that?
Please stop doing that.
I'm just recording. I'm just recording.
Some scars are carved into your skin, visible to anyone who looks close enough, but the deepest ones are buried under years of silence, hidden behind a quiet smile and a folded uniform. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon in the tiny mountain town of Pine Ridge, Oregon, the clock on the wall of the Rust Creek Diner ticked toward 3 o'clock. The bell above the front door chimed, cutting through the low hum of the rain and the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls. 3 men walked in, bringing with them cold air, heavy leather jackets, and an arrogant atmosphere that immediately made the entire room go quiet. At the head of the group was Marcus Vance, a man who owned half the real estate in the county and believed his family name gave him total ownership over every human being inside it. Beside him were his childhood friends, Darren and Chloe, both laughing at a cruel joke Marcus had just made. They took a booth near the front window, kicking their dirty boots onto the polished vinyl seats without a care in the world. Working behind the counter was Maya. To anyone in Pine Ridge, Maya was just the quiet, hard-working young woman who had showed up 3 years ago, asking for a job washing dishes. Clara, the 70-year-old widow who owned the Rust Creek Diner, had taken one look at Maya's clear, watchful eyes and given her an apron. Over those 3 years, Maya never complained, never called in sick, and rarely spoke about her past. She wore long-sleeved work shirts even in the high heat of summer, buttoned all the way down to her wrists. Her movements were smooth, efficient, and almost impossibly quiet. When she walked across the linoleum floor, she never made a sound. When a plate slipped from a customer's hand, Maya would catch it before it hit the ground, her instincts sharp as a razor. People thought she was just naturally nimble, a shy girl trying to make an honest living. Nobody in that small town knew where she had come from, and nobody guessed what lay beneath her simple cotton shirt. Marcus snapped his fingers loudly across the room, demanding service before they had even looked at a menu. Clara was in the back kitchen pulling fresh bread out of the oven, so Maya picked up a fresh pot of steaming hot coffee and a stack of clean mugs. She walked over to their booth with a calm, neutral expression. As she approached, Marcus looked up from his phone. For a fraction of a second, his eyes locked onto hers, and a flicker of strange, dark recognition crossed his face, quickly replaced by a smirk of pure contempt. He didn't remember her face right away, but he remembered the feeling of power he loved holding over people he deemed weaker than himself. 10 years ago, in the high school hallways of this very town, Marcus and his gang had made Maya's life a living nightmare, tormenting her until she vanished overnight without leaving a trace. Maya set 3 mugs on the table without saying a word. She tilted the pot, pouring the dark, scalding liquid with steady hands. The temperature of the coffee was near boiling, steam rising in thick curls into the chilly afternoon air. As she filled the 3rd cup, Darren deliberately extended his heavy elbow, striking Maya's forearm with sharp, calculated force. The sudden blow jarred the pot, but Maya's reflexes were so lightning fast that she adjusted her balance instantly, preventing a single drop from spilling onto the table. That display of composure seemed to irritate Marcus even more than a spill would have. He wanted weakness. He wanted panic. Seeing her stand there, calm and unbothered, ignited a pettiness inside him that had spent a decade festering. Marcus leaned back, sneering up at her. He intentionally reached out, grabbed the glass pot by its handle right out of her hand, and held it above her outstretched fingers. "You're a little too confident for a servant, aren't you?" he sneered, his voice loud enough for the 4 other elderly customers in the diner to hear. Maya stayed perfectly still. She didn't draw back, her shoulders remained level, and her eyes stayed fixed on his with a cold, unyielding clarity. "Please hand me the pot, sir," she said softly. Her voice carried no fear, no anger, only a flat, steady discipline. Marcus's smirk turned ugly. "What if I don't?" he challenged, glancing over at Chloe and Darren, who both snickered. Before anyone in the diner could realize what was happening, Marcus tilted the glass pot straight over Maya's bare hands and wrist. The boiling, dark coffee cascaded directly onto her skin. The temperature was high enough to cause instant, excruciating burns. The whole diner gasped. An elderly man in the corner stood up, dropping his fork. But what happened next stunned everyone in the room into complete silence. Maya didn't scream. She didn't pull her hand away. She didn't drop her head or burst into tears. Instead, she stood there like a statue carved from granite, absorbing the searing heat as the scalding coffee soaked her skin and dripping onto the floor. Her heart rate didn't even spike. Her breath remained deep, slow, and measured, controlled by a deep, instinctual mental switch that had been flipped long ago in places far darker and more dangerous than a mountain diner. When Marcus saw that she wasn't crying, his smile faltered. The pleasure he derived from inflicting pain evaporated into confusion and anger. He slammed the empty pot onto the table, shattering the glass base against the wood. "What is wrong with you?" Marcus hissed, standing up to loom over her. "Are you deaf? Are you stupid?" Maya slowly turned her hand over, looking down at the red, blistering skin on her wrist. Beneath the reddened surface, as her long sleeve shifted upward slightly from the movement, a thick, white scar became visible. It was a rugged, jagged track running from her wrist up toward her elbow, a combat scar left by shrapnel, flanked by the distinct outline of a military tattoo hidden deep on her forearm. She pulled her sleeve down calmly, her eyes rising to meet Marcus's gaze once again. "You shouldn't throw things in a public establishment, Marcus," she said quietly. Hearing his own name spoken in that tone made Marcus freeze. He squinted at her, searching her eyes, trying to connect this stoic, unbreakable woman with the frail, terrified 14-year-old orphan girl he used to shove into lockers and dump trash over a decade ago. "Maya," he whispered, a sudden wave of discomfort washing over him. But the discomfort was quickly replaced by ego. Well. Look at that." The little rat came crawling back to the garbage. "I thought you died in some foster home after you ran away." Darren laughed loudly, slapping the table. "Look at her, Marcus. She thinks she's tough now because she doesn't cry over a little hot water." At that moment, the kitchen doors swung open, and 70-year-old Clara rushed out, holding a clean towel. She had heard the glass shatter and the commotion. Seeing the burn on Maya's skin, Clara's face filled with horror and rage. "Get out of my diner!" Clara shouted, stepping between Maya and Marcus. "Get out right now, Marcus Vance. I don't care who your father is or how much money you have. You do not touch my staff." Marcus didn't like being yelled at by an old woman. His eyes narrowed, and he shoved Clara roughly by her shoulder. Clara was fragile, her knees weak from decades of hard work. She stumbled backward, losing her balance, heading straight toward the edge of the iron counter where a sharp metal edge threatened to catch the back of her head. In that microsecond, the quiet waitress named Maya vanished entirely. Before Clara's feet could even clear the floor, Maya moved. To the human eye, it was barely a blur. Maya's left hand shot out with terrifying precision, catching Clara by the collar of her apron and gently guiding her weight safely to the floor, completely breaking her fall. In the very same fluid motion, without breaking momentum, Maya shifted her weight onto her left leg. What followed was a movement so fast, so precise, and so devastating that it felt like an explosion in the small diner. Maya unleashed a spinning rear leg axe kick, her body rotating with fluid, mechanical grace. Her heel rose above her own head level in a sharp, arc-like vector, snapping downward with hundreds of pounds of concentrated hydraulic force. The strike landed with a thunderous impact directly onto Marcus's collarbone and upper chest. The force of the kick broke the silence like a gunshot. Marcus didn't just fall, he was launched backward through the air, crashing over the wooden table, shattering the booth behind him, and slamming into the hard floor 4 yards away. The air rushed out of his lungs in a ragged gasp. He lay there, gasping for breath, clutching his shoulder in utter shock and agony, his eyes wide with pure, unadulterated terror. Darren and Chloe stood frozen, their jaws open, completely paralyzed by what they had just witnessed. Nobody in Pine Ridge had ever seen a human move like that. It wasn't a sloppy bar fight punch, it was a military-grade execution of kinetic force, refined through thousands of hours of combat training. Darren, fueled by panic and pride, reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy brass knuckle set, stepping forward to strike Maya from behind. Without even turning her head completely, Maya sensed the shift in air pressure. She ducked smoothly beneath his swinging arm, stepped inside his guard, and drove her palm into his solar plexus, followed instantly by a sweep of her foot. Darren went down instantly, his breath completely cut off, writhing on the floor beside his friend. Maya didn't pursue them. She didn't shout. She didn't breathe heavily. She adjusted her apron, brushed a strand of dark hair behind her ear, and knelt down next to Clara, checking the old woman's pulse with gentle, caring fingers. "Are you all right, Clara?" Maya asked softly, her tone instantly returning to the warm, respectful voice she used every morning. Clara could only stare at her in absolute awe, her chest heaving. "Maya, child, what was that? Who are you?" The bell above the door chimed again. Two local police officers, who happened to be driving past and saw the commotion through the front window, burst into the diner with their hands on their holsters. "Nobody move," the lead officer shouted. Marcus, struggling to sit up on the floor, pointed a shaking finger at Maya, his face pale and sweating from pain. "Arrest her," he screamed, his voice cracking. "She's insane. She attacked us. She broke my collarbone. Look what she did to us." The second officer, a veteran named Sergeant Miller who had served in the county for 20 years, looked from the shattered wooden booth to Marcus, and then to Maya, who was standing calmly next to Clara. Sergeant Miller walked over to Maya. "Maya, I need you to step back and keep your hands visible," he said cautiously. Maya didn't argue. She raised her hands slowly, palms open, completely cooperative. As she did, the right sleeve of her work shirt slid back down her arm. Sergeant Miller glanced down at her wrist, intending to cuff her, but his eyes caught the dark ink exposed on her inner forearm. His breath hitched. Beneath the scar was an emblem, the trident, accompanied by a specialized unit insignia that only those who knew military history could ever recognize. It was the mark of the Special Warfare Operator, specifically, an elite counter-terrorism support specialist attached to the Navy SEALs, one of the few women ever selected to train and operate alongside the Navy's most secretive forward units. Sergeant Miller stopped dead in his tracks. He lowered his handcuffs instantly. He stared at the tattoo, then looked up into Maya's eyes, his expression shifting from suspicion to profound, overwhelming respect. He slowly brought his right hand up to his forehead and delivered a sharp, crisp military salute. "At ease, Sergeant," Maya said softly, giving him a small, respectful nod. The entire diner was dead silent. Marcus was staring at the officer in utter confusion. "What are you doing?" Marcus yelled, coughing as he tried to stand. "She's a waitress. She's an orphan nobody. She worked here for minimum wage. Arrest her." Sergeant Miller turned around slowly, looking down at Marcus with utter disgust. "Shut your mouth, Marcus," the officer said coldly. "You're speaking to a decorated combat veteran who earned the Navy Cross and spent 8 years in places you couldn't survive in a nightmare. If she wanted to break your neck today, you wouldn't be breathing right now to complain about it." The truth hit the room like a physical blow. The quiet girl who washed dishes, swept the floors, and quietly served coffee to elderly retirees was a world-class operative who had fought in the darkest corners of the globe. 10 years earlier, when Maya was 14, her parents had been killed in a car accident. Left with no family, she had been placed in an abusive local foster house in Pine Ridge. Marcus and his wealthy friends had targeted her daily, knowing she had no parents to protect her and no voice in the town. They made her feel entirely worthless, driving her to the point where she felt she had no reason to exist. One winter night, after a particularly brutal humiliation at school, Maya packed a small bag and ran away into the snow. She ended up in a recruiting office 3 counties over the day she turned 18. With nothing left to lose, she threw every ounce of her pain, grief, and anger into physical conditioning. She pushed her body beyond human limits, joining the Navy and eventually qualifying for specialized operational integration programs. For 8 years, she served in silent operations overseas, protecting others because no one had been there to protect her when she was a child. She had survived explosions, hand-to-hand combat in dark alleys, and loss that no human should ever bear. 3 years ago, during her final deployment in Afghanistan, her team was ambushed in a narrow valley. Maya had dragged 2 wounded teammates across open terrain under heavy sniper fire, sustaining deep shrapnel wounds across her arms and chest. She was medically discharged with full honors. But when the noise of war stopped, the silence was deafening. She didn't want fame, medals, or money. She suffered from quiet, deep grief over the brothers she couldn't save. Looking for peace, she had returned to the only town she knew, not to seek revenge on those who had hurt her, but to find a quiet place to heal. She chose the Rust Creek Diner because Clara had looked at her on her first day back with motherly kindness, offering her a hot meal without asking a single question about where she had been. Marcus sat on the floor, his face drained of all color as the weight of who he had been tormenting finally sank into his mind. He had thought she was weak because she was gentle. He had mistaken her patience for powerlessness. Sergeant Miller pulled out his notebook and looked at the broken glass, the spilled coffee, and the shattered booth. "Marcus Vance, Darren Cole," Miller said sternly, "you are under arrest for assault, destruction of private property, and disorderly conduct. I've got 4 witnesses in this room who saw you pour scalding coffee on a civilian and shove an elderly woman." As the second officer handcuffed Marcus and led him toward the squad car outside, Marcus turned his head, looking back at Maya one last time. For 10 years, he had carried the arrogance of a predator. But as he looked at Maya standing tall, composed, and unfazed by his existence, he realized that she had never been his victim, she had simply grown into someone far beyond his understanding. Once the police cars drove away and the diner quieted down, Clara walked over to Maya. She took Maya's burned hand gently in her own, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "Why didn't you ever tell me, Maya?" Clara asked softly. "You served our country. You survived all of that, and you came here to sweep my floors?" Maya looked down at Clara, her warm smile returning, softening the hardened edge in her eyes. "Because out there, Clara, my job was to survive," Maya replied gently. "But here, in this diner, with you, you gave me a place to live. You gave me a home when I had nothing left. Sweeping these floors was the first peace I had felt in 10 years." Clara wrapped her arms around Maya, holding her tightly. The regulars in the diner began to applaud softly, a warm sound that drowned out the rain outside. True strength is never measured by how loudly you can threaten others, or how much power you hold over the weak. Real strength is found in the quiet discipline of those who possess the power to destroy, but choose instead the grace to serve, protect, and heal.